everybody, and welcome. My name is Garry Eastman, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Garratt Publishing and to our new space. You may notice that we have a new painting up on the wall. This is a painting that we selected by a woman called Carla Hananiah. Carla, last year, was the winner of the John Coburn Prize in the overall Blake Prize for Religious Art. And those of you who know us, our slogan for a number of years has been exploring the mystery, and we thought this sort of painting by Carla sums it up pretty well. Tonight's a special night because we are actually going live. We're actually streaming this presentation tonight all over the world. So it's quite a breakthrough. So if you'd like to be on show, just stand up every now and then or turn around or something like that. Tonight also, it's a free night, as all of our talks are, but we are running it in conjunction with and to support the Brigidine Asylum Seekers Project as well. So we leave it to you to make your own decision, but there is a box at the near the door, and you can make your whatever you consider as a suitable donation as you go through. I'd just like to introduce some of the people from Garratt. Behind the camera over there is Stephen Moore. Stephen joined us recently, and he's our education consultant. Our CEO is Tony Bibiano, who many of you would know. The man who saves our life every day is Matt Sincotta on the computers and the sound system. Sandy runs the bookstore, and Jolene does she also does customer service, and she also does all our bookkeeping and things as well. How many people here have actually walked the Camino? Right. Well, tonight we hope you get an opportunity to relive your experiences, and we hope also those of you who haven't walked, maybe you might consider it. Particularly when you remember that Tony Doherty, who's going to be one of our speakers tonight, on his first leg of the Camino, celebrated his 75th birthday in Santiago.
Not too much information.
And then he went back and did it again the following year, did another leg. Ailsa has walked 3 Caminos, and those of you who have read her book will know that she began by walking the Francis one, which is across the top of Spain, and then the subject of the book is walking from Granada up to Santiago and on to Finisterre. We're very fortunate, really, that we have Ailsa and we have Tony with us, because there are 2 key remarkable people. They're both people who believe very much in storytelling. Ailsa has got a background in theatre, both as a writer, as a director, and as an actor. And in recent times, this year has been a very productive year for her, because in addition to publishing the book in April, her episode of the ABC Radio's Poetica aired on the 5th of May, and on July the 11th, and some of you may have seen it advertised in the paper, Bell Shakespeare opened a production of The Duchess of Malfi, which was co-adapted by Ailsa and performed at the Sydney Opera House. I think what's wonderful from my getting to know Ailsa through her book is that what makes the book, for me, the best book I've read on the Camino, is that she brings to the writing all of her skills as a dramatist, and she also is disarmingly honest in what she describes as she goes through it. So I look forward to hearing her in her conversation with Tony. Tony I've known for many, many years. I can say to you that he's had all of these sort of positions as a director of the CCD in Sydney, at which time the CCD in Sydney was the largest Catholic bookshop in the whole of Australia. Then he studied overseas. He went to the Catholic Adult Education Centre and ran that for a number of years. Then he popped up as Dean of the Cathedral, which coincided with the renovations of the Cathedral. which coincided with the Olympic Games. And if you want to find out how the spires suddenly appeared on St Mary's Cathedral, ask Tony for the gossip about that as well. Since then, he's been parish priest of Rose Bay, which in a typical style now includes Dover Heights, and that's it, right. I think what's remarkable is that Tony's presbytery is really like a house of hospitality for people who go to Sydney, and it's really delightful that he makes the place really open to lots and lots of people who are passing through. I said that both of these people are great storytellers and have great interest in story. Tony has written really what is our most successful book, which is So You're Working for the Catholic Church. It's an introduction to Catholicism, but it's an introduction via story. One of the things that Tony did when he was first moved in as parish priest of Rose Bay was write, with the help of his pastoral associate, write to people and say, come and have a meal with us. And he conducted a number of meals. Initially, when people sat down, he'd say, now, what would you like from the parish and what can we do and all those sort of things. And to quote Tony's own words, they were disastrous. But then he happened on the idea of saying, tell us a funny story about your grandparents. And he couldn't get the people to go home. So would you please give a welcome to two great storytellers, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
I always feel like the news anchor goes on the right.
Is it important that we use the mic, by the way, for the streaming?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
That
Very
was your
obedient,
first,
very obedient fellow I am.
Your first bit of disobedience went out the window. Good.
I got to Santiago when I was 75. Thanks, Garry. Thanks a lot. Ailsa got it when she was 25. Is that right?
Exactly. 2 years ago.
Thanks very much for the welcome.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you all for coming too. It's great.
I've been involved with the initiatives of Garry's publishing for, actually it's close on 50 years. It's about 45 years. So, and it's been a very, I'm not sure there's a closer colleague in the church that I work with than Garry himself. So it's been he's a remarkable layperson who's absolutely determinedly trying to build an adult church, as I am. And it's could I make a statement to begin with,
yes.
Ailsa, because it's we set this up some months ago, I guess, but of course the events of the last few days, in fact last few months, I'd like to say the last 25 years, have overcome where we are tonight. And it's left me with what I'd say a swirl of emotions, as I imagine all of us have. I'm sure there are people who are not of the Catholic tradition here, but you can imagine how we feel about the headlines and the reality which is beginning to emerge. Some of the emotions are deep confusion, disgust, a grief that, yes, I'm not very used to, I must say, feeling a grief and a wounded nature of my church. Above all, the horror of the damage that have been done to young people. We don't know what the boundaries are. We don't know what's happened. And of course, we can't follow through the stories of just how that damage has affected people's lives. There's a tragic irony in this too, by the way. I mean, there's deep in the minds of lots of people, I think, is such a horror about the perpetrators. People will say, lock them up and throw away the key, tow them out into the ocean. But the tragic irony is a lot of people who are abused, become the abusers. And so there's this incredible spiral of evil that exists around this thing that, well, I'm not quite sure that I have the language or the expression to say what it means at the moment. Perhaps I do want to say tonight to you here personally, who I'm sure may have had very close experience of abuse, or know people who have been abused, or have been abused in other ways other than sexually. The horror of it makes me feel that I'd like to say, for my small part of my colleagues in the Catholic priesthood, a deep statement of apology and sorrow. I hope that doesn't sound trite, but it's entirely heartfelt. I don't think I've thought about anything else for the last few days, as probably many of us have, and there were some comments that we'll probably make about it a little later on, but I just wanted to make those statements up front. In fact, in Sitting Across Spain, Ailsa has come up against the experience of sexual abuse, which she writes about in a very beautiful and graceful way, and we might be dealing with that later. But I want to make this statement up front because I don't think it would be properly to respect the extraordinary writing of this woman to overwhelm the night with this question. Because the statements that have been made in the book are wonderfully graceful. They're extraordinarily creative in terms of reconciliation, by the way. And there's all sorts of links between the headlines of today and the area that Ailsa has mined. But I hope that's not an inappropriate opening comment, but it's just something that I'd like to open the evening's conversation with. Is that okay? Okay. I'm more of an Andy Williams sort of. Can I tell you how I got to know your writing?
Please.
Because it's it's not such a hell of a good story, by the way. But anyway, we have a mutual friend whose name is Sandy Gore. She's a very fine Australian actor, and a woman I met probably about 20 years ago making that film Brides of Christ. Remember that? It's really been part of it. And I went along as a sort of a religious consultant. Didn't do much. They asked me all sorts of questions. None of them I knew really the answer to, but Sandy was one of the relationships that continued. And last Easter, on Thursday night, just before you can imagine the whole unfolding of the Easter ceremonies, I get a book in the mail from Sandy, and she says, a friend of mine, Ailsa Piper, has written this book, Sinning Across Spain. Well, I just looked at the title and I thought, well, I'll get to that. Probably about August or September. But I made a terrible mistake and opened the first page. And it drew me into the story in a way that, it just ruined the Easter ceremonies. That's the first thing. And secondly, I finished at about 1 a.m. on Easter Monday night. So absolutely entranced with the book. And I wrote to Ailsa, and it's been a lovely relationship. And there's the Camino, which is described with, as Garry said, as well as I know, other writers have described it, but also this intriguing level, which I'd like Ailsa to perhaps explain to us about. What do you mean by sitting across Spain, anyway?
Thanks, Tony. I should say, for those of you who haven't read it, Tony actually did more than read my book. He wrote, I think, the most beautiful response to it, which kind of presages all the stuff that's in the media at the moment. So if you haven't read his response, please have a look. Just Google ailsapiper.com and you'll see, and if you search for Tony, you'll find the response. It's very beautiful, and I felt very lucky to get it. So, sitting across Spain, what does it mean? Those of you who've read it, I apologise in advance. On the back of the book, there's this thing that says, I will walk off your sins. Pilgrim seeks sinners for mutually beneficial arrangement. 7 Deadlies, a specialty. That's what I sent out to a lot of people, one at least of whom is here tonight, asking them to donate a sin for me to carry across Spain. I thought I was going to write a monologue for a friend of mine to perform about walking the Camino. Where it came from, I was researching Duchess of Malfi, the play that Garry spoke about earlier, and there were pilgrims in the original version of Duchess of Malfi, and we were making decisions about whether we'd have pilgrims in our version or not. So I was researching pilgrims, and I found this weird little arcane piece of information that said that in medieval times, a rich person like you could pay a poor person like me to take your sin and carry it to a holy place, and when I got there with my blisters and stinking hair shirt, you would get the absolution and I would get to walk home.
Idea. Wonderful idea. The second collection's on it.
That's it. Well, for some inexplicable reason, this seemed to me like a marvellous idea. And I literally couldn't put it down. In fact, I've said to Tony, all my life in the Catholic Church as a little girl, and I've had a very conflicted relationship with the Catholic Church, which I think is about many things, but it's probably actually just about living. I think every deep relationship in our lives is conflicted. There is no other way to be in relationship. I think if you're not conflicted in some way, you're probably not in a relationship. That's my feeling anyway.
By the way, if you ask people here who is conflicted with the Catholic Church, you would be embarrassed by the response that you would get, by the way.
None of you?
Myself no. Au contraire.
But the thing I'd always wanted was a vocation. Everyone said when I was growing up that you'd get this thing called a vocation and that, a beautiful shiny angel was going to come down and tell you what to do with your life, and it never happened. And then sitting over some sort of silly old books, the vocation sort of seemed to be ask people to tell you their sins. So I put out that letter, very light-hearted, very flippant kind of tone in some ways. And
did you expect a response?
I don't really know what I expected. I knew I needed people to tell me sins because otherwise there'd be no story. And I did say in the letter, you will be the co-writers of the story, whatever the story will be. But I think the shock came when people took it seriously. Some people came aboard because they knew my work, they trusted me, and so they gave me generalised things to kind of be of assistance. But the moment when I really knew it was on and that I had bitten off more than I could chew was when the first one was actually a woman who said that she wished vengeance on her husband. I didn't know this woman. She was a total stranger to me. And she wrote that my sin is a desire for vengeance to be visited upon the woman who had the affair and caused the breakup of my marriage a few years ago. I'm carrying it around and I don't even care anymore, but I still can't stop wishing it. And I can't tell you what that was like to receive from a perfect stranger, because I was able to Google her, of course, and find out who she was. So I also sort of knew the person and the thing. And
Where did she pick up the invitation, by the way?
People forwarded it. And I did an interview on Alan Bro's radio program because he thought it was an interesting idea. But then others came that were real, but then the one that really, I think, hammered it, I remember getting this one like a body blow, which I won't read, but the full confession is actually in here because God love them, they've given permission for them to be quoted, where she said she'd had an affair with her best friend's husband, not once, not twice, but over a long period of time, and it had cost the friendship. But she said she'd carried this alone for all these years. She'd never been able to have a relationship herself since this, and we are talking a very significant period of time. And the last words of that confession were, I'd be so grateful if you would walk off what remains. I've done the best I can with owning it, dealing with it, seeing it, and I tried very hard to forgive myself. I've understood so much about human nature from this mistake I made, but I don't truly know if I've forgiven myself. I think I have, but it was so big for me, maybe I should go to confession, whatever it takes. Maybe you'll find the answer. Who knows?
Terrific trust, isn't it?
Well, yes, but also, for an idiot who thought she was doing a kind of an interesting project, suddenly it hit home that I was doing something that I didn't really feel I was equipped to do. So and I had about 20 or so sins, varying in nature, and off I went. But that was when I got the idea that walking with sin wasn't going to be a walk in the park. You know, so I picked the Camino Mos Árabe, which is it turned out to be 1,300 kilometres, which goes from Granada, and I picked that because it was solitary. I knew that the Camino Frances would be a different experience to what medieval pilgrims had done. So I picked that and off I went.
1,300 kilometres, 30 or 40 kilometres a day. Some of you know what that means, I guess, but through cold and rain and rivers and...
Yes, Spain was having their worst flooding in decades that particular year. So it was like the gods went, yeah, great, we'll fix you with pride and hubris, you know. You think you can do this? Good, okay. And they washed away a few houses and the rivers. There was a very attractive moment where I peeled off all my togs or my lower togs and sort of held them above my head with my sticks and clambered across a river. I think about that now with all that we know in this country.
Can't think of anything else,
you know, I just think what an idiot, but anyway.
You talk a lot about, I mean, to go back to the fundamental Camino and to put the sins aside for a moment, the whole question of walking, the physicality of it, the effort of it, the searching, but all of that you really describe in the most lyrical terms. Walking is very important to you, isn't it?
It is. I do walk a lot. I mean, I really walk a lot. My idea of a good time is to sort of do 35 Ks to the coffee shop, you know, at the end of the day. So I do say that, but I don't normally carry 12 kilos, you know, every day when I'm doing it, and I don't normally carry sins. So the pleasure of my walking, well, I carry my own, of course, but the pleasure of it was mixed on the road. But, you know, it is that thing, there's something about the connection, and we've talked about this, the connection between the rhythm of walking and the thing of giving yourself over to a simple task, like all I have to do is get from here to here. You know, we complicate our lives so much with so many other things, and for me, even a one-day walk is actually a chance to be absolutely present, you know, and particularly if you're walking on rough ground or uneven surfaces, you actually have to be mindful of what your feet are doing, you know. And the alternative title for this book was Praying with My Feet, and I feel like I'm never closer to, it was the title I wanted, but not the title I ended up with.
Can I tell a story about that just to interrupt you for a moment?
Please.
Ailsa walked 1,300 kilometres. Well, I strolled along 350. It was just don't touch this, don't touch it. But when I got to Santiago, there's this wonderful medieval city. Oh, I suppose 1,500 years old, something.
Yeah.
And there's a cathedral there, extraordinary cathedral, in which, if I might just, they have this Botafumeiro, which is a huge incense swing. I mean, it's as big as a small car, and they swing it across the cathedral, as many of you know, to clear, historically, the rather stench of pilgrims. I mean, this is the only way they could to make the place habitable. Anyway, you get to this particular cathedral, as we did. And a young American woman said to me, I was walking with a friend of mine, and she joined us, and she said, "Did you pray much on the Camino?" And I said, "Well, not actually. I mean, we did pray. We prayed the Psalms early in the morning. My friend, we'd say a decade of the Rosary, you know, but they were sort of little rituals. But I would thought it was going to be meditative and dealing with this inner journey within me, that would be an extended meditation, which had the promise. But I was so focused upon getting my body from A to B and the effort that it required. And I said to this young woman, I said, "Well, no, I don't think I did pray a lot." And she then said, she used the phrase that Ailsa did, she said, "You know, you prayed with your feet." And the extraordinary implication of that is that our body is so involved in our whole emotional, spiritual reality. And that's why walking, to me, was a completely integrating thing. And your body, you do pray with your feet, don't you?
You do. And look, the other thing about it, I think, is that anyone who's grown up, and I was really struck, a lot of the masses along the way on the Camino Frances, there were no masses on the Mos Árabe, there were no churches open, which is why in the end this Camino really becomes a love song to the natural world as much as anything else, because it was the natural world that came to my rescue. Church doors were often closed on this road. In fact, on the Camino Frances, the churches are they're kept open in a way because of the presence of pilgrims. But one of the things that really would strike me was that you'd go in and sometimes they'd say the Mass in Spanish and occasionally even in Latin. And of course I remembered some of the Latin from when I was little. But the thing that struck me was how easy it is for those prayers to become just something you know and you don't think about and you don't necessarily engage with and you don't have that relationship that's visceral and real with them. Whereas on the road, walking and dealing with things that are very visceral, you know, there is something else that happens where you're kind of taken out of yourself. I mean, forgive me if it sounds a bit naff, but literally sometimes I feel like I lift out of myself when I'm walking, and particularly those extended periods of walking. And to me that is, you know, we bandy these words like transcendent, but actually you do feel, many people speak of it, I certainly have experienced it, this feeling of transcending the kind of smallness of self, you know, but also of witnessing yourself as small. And to me that's about what I had always yearned for in prayer but didn't always find sitting in a pew listening to words from which I could disconnect, you know. And somehow you can't disconnect from the experience of prayer on that road. It kind of trips you up, doesn't it? You know, it gets you in the most unexpected moment.
You meet it in the stories of people too. I mean, the sharing of stories and the sharing of walking goes to the very essence of what this is all about. The breaking of bread, I mean, it's all got that Eucharist. I'd use the word Eucharist. People would use other language for it, but it's a wonderful share. One of the people I met who, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but I met a man named Antonio, I remember that, who has had a heart transplant. And he walked probably about 2,500 kilometres all over Spain. His credential, which is the passport that you get, I've got it there, yeah. You get it stamped along the way. He had credentials about 3 metres long. Yeah. But his motive for walking in the Camino was the young man whose heart he now carries always wanted to do the Camino. And he engaged in 2,000 kilometres with this heart of another young man and a dog, an Alsatian dog. Didn't have any money. He bottled cigarettes from people. I bought him a beer about 9:30 in the morning. He took half of the beer and he poured the other half into the saucer for the dog. But it was the dimension of the stories and the people that you meet just are breathtaking.
They are. And, you know, part of the beauty of it is you get those stories which are kind of heartwarming and, you know, there are several of those in the book. But you also, and this I think is, you know, this goes to really what I believe about the world, I suppose, tough nut that I am. You also get the people who you don't want to walk with, who want to walk with you no matter what. You know, one of the things that people say to me about the Camino often is, because I have a tendency, a bit like you, I suspect, to kind of remember. I mean, I'm a rememberer of the good bits. So people often say to me, you always talk about it as though it's this wonderful thing. So I've reminded myself always, just now, to actually focus on the other bits, the bits that really teach you, which are the people you don't want to walk with, the people who snore and smell, and you have to sleep. Well, you don't have to. You can go into a slightly nicer accommodation, of course. But if you're in the refuges, which I really like, oddly, perversely, you're in there with humanity, which is not what you paint it to be. Humanity isn't always clean-haired and softly spoken and sweet-smelling and, speaking words of gentle wisdom. Humanity can be quite rough. And to me, that's the other beauty of it, is that again and again you're forced to see what you are in this. Pride is my great sin, the sin I carried from day one of this. And it was a masterclass. And I was absolutely and completely on both my Caminos in different ways, brought literally to my knees. In this book, and we've talked about the idea of being broken open, but actually no, you don't travel until, you don't travel as a human being until you're broken in some way. And I think that's terribly true. Mm-hmm. And the Camino for me, there's a description in here at one point of me in the rain, on my knees, by the side of a dirt road, sobbing uncontrollably, dry retching, sort of really vomiting, and not knowing why. But it was that, from there on in, things didn't actually go brilliantly, but they got better, and they'd been beautiful before that. But it is that thing that, I think people expect it to be something kind of Shirley MacLaine fabulous, and it is that, but it's also deeply a teacher, and you don't get to learn a lesson, it seems to me, without some cost. Not a good lesson, anyway.
Can I draw us to really the nub of what you did there, which I must say I just find, I was saying a few minutes ago, I think it's quite unique in my thinking about the spiritual life, thinking about reconciliation, thinking about sin, delinquency, choices. Ailsa, of course, says she carried somebody else's sins. Now, I've spent about 6 months raising this with dinner guests or anywhere I go. I say, what do you think about this? Well, they give me they throw buns at me. They really can't deal with the idea of carrying somebody else's sins. I think the sort of feeling with people is, look, we've got enough troubles ourselves. And I hope this isn't blasphemous, but leave that to Jesus. Not I don't carry people's sins. And so that really triggered my curiosity. And I must say, as I thought about it, it became more and more real. And in your reflections, you were saying the presence of other people's sins, and perhaps you've said this, but helped you to dwell upon your own fragility and your own choices and your own development and your own maturity, and it brought it to this. But the question is, can we carry another person's sins? And the way I've worked it through in my own mind, and I'd be pleased in the conversation later to perhaps see if we can develop this further, is how do we support one another? To what extent are we connected with other people? In the Catholic tradition, in the Catholic Church, we say we're a community of supporting believers. How do we do that? Is that just rhetoric? And, we'll get into the topic of the headline soon, but just holding back from that for a moment. I was on the board of the Sacred Heart Hospice in Sydney for a number of years. And some of the pastoral workers in the hospice were geniuses. They took on the grief and the letting go of people who were dying. They were engaged with them in a most personal manner. And so I can imagine taking on the grief of a person. We all know the sacrifice that carers give to perhaps quadriplegic patients. A mother might just absolutely put aside everything else to look after a child who's quadriplegic. We understand that. That's real connection. But can we do it morally? Can we take on somebody else's delinquencies? That's the nub of the question that Ailsa has presented. And I just find it a fascinatingly interesting, and it has all sorts of implications for me. got implications about the question I just raised. How connected are we? To what extent do we carry the delinquencies of others? Is it possible? Sorry.
Well, there's an interesting thing about that, though. In order to do it, it requires vulnerability on both sides. It requires enormous vulnerability from a person to look into the eyes of someone else and say, I did this thing and I'm ashamed of it and I'm going to tell you. You know, to actually be that humble and that vulnerable to another human being. And then it requires vulnerability to receive it, because you have to actually not sit in judgment, which I did in the beginning when I got some of those things. It was like, whatever, I don't know. And I never scoffed at them, but I absolutely had moments of thinking, what? You know, and then what happens once, it seemed to me anyway, once that exchange had happened in my experience of doing it this way, I made a decision. I didn't know how you walked with sins, and there was no guidebook, so I literally just thought, well, every single day I will start my day with the list of sins. I quoted them directly, and I would sit and read them. And, 6 weeks of doing that every day, and then I would walk and I would carry the thoughts. And what I didn't know was happening was that, to varying degrees back at home, people knew I was walking. So in that moment of sharing whatever it was, however they told me, the knowledge then that someone was thinking about their actions all day, every day for 6 weeks, really, I didn't know, demanded of them that they looked at their actions in a different way, that they looked at it maybe the way I would see it, maybe in another. So they examined it quite differently, and there were profound changes for some people in terms of the things that had happened to them while I was walking, which I didn't know until I got to the end. And I think it's absolutely to do with that thing that in the handing over, there is a grace that is in some ways bigger than the grace of saying, oh, I'll do this thing, that requires enormous... Because also it goes to the thing of the confessional too, that there's one thing in the confessional that we've grown up with in the Catholic Church, but, by the cold, hard light of day, to say to someone maybe who's got a Facebook construct of you as this kind of nice, adorable person who never does anything wrong, to then break that and say, actually, I've wished 7 kinds of hell on this person. You don't think I'm capable of that, but I am. It's actually asking a person to reassess them,
Without being too sentimental, what you say about a person articulating their story, that woman who said, look, I've slept with my best friend's husband 5 times. Actually, that level of articulating the story, I think, is well known to those of us who work. Confessions have moved from the little box these days to something a lot more adult and a lot more satisfying, I suppose most of you know. But it's all the storytelling and the admitting of getting people to articulate what's within them. That's of immediate, I suppose the psychological word is catharsis, but sharing the story. It's humbling, isn't it?
Hugely so.
People, we used to, in the seminaries, they said, don't make judgment. You can't make judgment. When people are so honest, you do recognise your own dishonesty. You do recognise your own lack of courage. So it is a wonderful moment, and I think that you have had that experience from what you've done. The question then is, and this is what we were talking about last night, I think, well, what do you do with that? How do you absolve people? The image, I suppose, in the Catholic tradition is the priest says a prayer and God absolves. Well, I must say that has never satisfied me about what's happening with a real sharing of what you're talking about. The real issue is the person herself really understanding that the community, not some remote God, the community is accepting them and helping them to forgive themselves. There's a great deal in the best theology of reconciliation, I think, about the need that we have is to forgive ourselves. God never, Anyway, I won't go into that. But that's the nub of it. And I think that what was happening in Ailsa's story had a great deal to do with those people beginning to forgive themselves because of what you were doing. And so there was a very authentic and surprising and deeply moving for me sort of expansion of what this gift of reconciliation is about.
Yes, I think the thing that I am still terribly moved by, from the sinner's perspective, is how hard it was for some of them. For some people it was fine. There were people who literally sort of said, I'll give you anger because I think anger is a terrible thing. And I would grapple with that all the time. And in fact, the relationship with anger becomes kind of central to me. But for the ones who really wrote something quite specific and quite personal, it felt to me like their travel, I had no idea of how far they would travel. And I think that's absolutely about the self-forgiveness thing. And I mean, a lot of the New Age stuff talks about this in such airy-fairy ways. But actually, if we go again, and I don't mean to make it like she's the most interesting story in the book, because she actually isn't, I don't think at all, if one wants to get into interesting stories. But that woman, she got really sick while I was walking. She was stuck in bed. It was like everything conspired to make her have the time, the space, the agony, if you want, to look at this thing. And she had looked at it really long and hard for 20-odd years. And not been able to have a relationship, really something had stopped her in all that time. And so I think that thing of whatever self-forgiveness is, it's not just something pretty, it's not just something easy, it's a real negotiation with, a bit like what we were saying about walking, it's negotiation with the muddy bits, the kind of sticky bits. Because for me, of course, the thing I should say is every single one of the sins that was given to me, I had actually either experienced or experienced on the road. So, it was also a thing of thinking, Queen of the Sinners here is going to take to the road. So, I don't know, that's the other part of it, is the shared sort of humanity, the understanding of.
Can I ground a lot of this? Is
a bit highfalutin.
Well, is it highfalutin or is it touching really, where we all are? But I'll tell you what I'd love to do, and I'd love you to read some of because apart from the ideas, the graceful writing in this book is really quite extraordinary. Can you think of a part of the book that, I don't know about the Alganzo story?
Do you want Domingo? Can I read you something lovely? Because I feel like we've got into sort of...
heavy water.
Yeah, El Ganso is actually a town on the Camino, a little teeny town that we've both walked through because it's on the Camino Frances, and you've got a nice El Ganso story. So,
I have.
Hang on. El Ganso it's on the Frances. It's not far out of Leon. It's a little crumbling one-horse, literally it's actually a two-bar town. In fact, there's the cowboy bar at the entrance to the bar, and then there's the bar that you only know if you go and talk to the locals, if you get off the Camino and you go and they take you to it. And this goes to what Garry said about us both being story people. If there's another thing the book's about, it is actually about the way in which the stories we tell about ourselves, the way they define us. My mother told me The Owl and the Pussycat every single night of my life from the day I was born. And I think that's how I come to have a relationship that's lasted, and the quest, a wish to quest and all of those things, is that I got told this story about this mad, at odds couple who kind of went off on a great adventure, and she proposed to him and didn't wait for him. And it was a great fairy story. So I really think stories sort of tell us something. So this is just from El Ganso, and it's a real kind of argument for telling stories, I suppose, and listening to stories. It's the end of a day, a long, fairly hot day. I wandered out of the Pilgrim refuge as the sun flirted with the horizon. A lone dog barked, and a bird fluttered among the beams of an abandoned adobe building behind me. To my left was the handful of houses that made up the town. To my right was the road out. Opposite was a narrow dirt lane between two tumble-down buildings, and walking towards me up that lane was a man with broad, open features, his eyes surrounded by deep lines. He leaned on a walking stick and waved with his free hand. "Buenas tardes, peregrina," he he called, his face creasing into a grin. That smile was my introduction to Domingo. We stood in the main street talking about the weather, how far I'd walked and where I was from. Australia got a good response. He held out his free arm and suggested a little walk, un camino pequeño. We set off at Domingo pace, stopping to sniff the wind, to look and listen. He gave me the grand tour of El Ganso, where he had spent his entire life. We saw the houses of his brothers and sisters. A big 2-storey house, not so nice as the low ones. The vacant land, just waiting for a nice lady from Australia to buy it and build a new home. The abandoned houses, falling into disrepair and back into the ground. The edible rose hips and the scratching chooks with their scrawny chicks. Stories everywhere. The house where he was born, the families who went away, the home that waits for his son. The flowers he planted for his sister, the figs, so good, so good. Then he took me to his house and ushered me inside. He showed me his kitchen and the kettle his wife favoured. Their bedroom and bathroom, both modern and cool. The guest room for my next visit. Then his shed with its tools and folding garden furniture. His backyard where he picked for me white roses tinged with softest pink and 2 perfect pears. He had sons in Seattle and Madrid, he told me. They made a lot of money, but they didn't come home much. The whole tour took maybe an hour. Details, affection, the wonder of his almost abandoned town. ¿Te gusta mi pueblo? You like my town? I did. I still do. As the sun set, he walked me back along the empty main street to the refuge, where he left me with a stiff bow and a sweep of his free arm, saying, Esta es mi pueblo. This is my town. I watched him walk away, the scent of pears and roses wafting in the warm air as the church steeple turned orange. All around his retreating figure, the stones of the houses glowed. His home was radiant, radiating. I saw how full it was of loves and losses, and how much richer I was for him having stepped into my life to tell me of them. I took my fruits and flowers to adorn my table at the cowboy bar. Cowboys are a disappearing breed, and I wondered about the future of those pueblos. Would they survive the rush of the young to the cities and beyond? So that was my experience of Domingo. I think you should let Tony tell you his, which is quite different.
I've lost all my confidence. I can't tell a story as good as that. Beautiful writing, isn't it? Just lovely, just lovely.
Thanks.
Anyway, I suppose I'm committed now. This one of the extraordinary things that Ailsa talks about in the book is coincidence. Extraordinary coincidences. And one of the coincidences, of many, was this tiny little spot in Spain called El Ganso. It's just tiny. Anyway, I went out, set off from Leon with a friend of mine, and he got a little bit of an injury, so I left him, rather unsympathetically, and kept walking, and he was going to catch a bus and pick me up a little while later. So I'm walking by myself, and I reached about nightfall and came to this place called El Ganso, not very attractive, and I found about the only refugio there that had a bed left, and homed in there, and I was then introduced to living in a sort of a telephone box. The room was about the size of a telephone box, with 4 extraordinarily attractive 20-year-old German cyclists of the female persuasion.
Marvellous.
Ailsa's got a phrase in the books that says, look, if you're going to worry about a flash of flesh occasionally, don't do the Camino. I'm more used to a quiet presbytery life. So negotiating these 4 cyclists was quite a problem, and without language, that they're German and there was a sort of a wash basin shower in the corner, and negotiating that was even more hilarious. However, having done all that, I set off for the cowboy bar, which I couldn't believe this woman had written about. And there I'm with 5 Germans with no common language, but we sang for about 2.5 hours over a meal and wine, and then the chef came out and joined in the singing. We were singing all sorts, any song that had a sort of Volare, Valderie, Valdera, German drinking songs, extraordinary thing. And the chef started introducing me to grappa. Not in the small glasses, but in the small buckets. So the last blurred memory I had of El Ganzo, this is far less elegant than your story, but the last element memory of El Ganzo was, I think I was dancing with this grizzled chef. He was bearded and I was bearded, and we were cheek to cheek. I wish I'd have met Domingo. Oh. So much more respectable. And it's a wonderful moments of the whole thing. Perhaps there's another section you could read. Would you? I don't know whether you want to read the section about your friend at the Amigo. And the whole issue. This is an issue, really, an expression of the horrific events of today. And is that the time to read it?
Sure. Sure. Yes. Okay. Yes. There's a lady nodding. Okay. You'll be our gauge. The book is divided into 3 sections. It's framed as though it's a 3-act play. The Camino law, for those of you who know it, is that the Camino acts in 3 parts. This is to do with the Camino Frances, but it was true of this one for me too, that the first act is, the first third, is the act of the body, in which the pilgrim is taught their lessons through the body, and most pilgrims are, they get their blisters and they've not walked enough with their pack, and you see people really suffering. The second act is the act of the mind, which traditionally on the Camino Frances is through the meseta, which is a long plain that lots of people say is hideous and boring. It was my favourite bit. It reminded me of home so much. It was beautiful. And the third, which is up into the mountains and mists of Galicia, is the act of the spirit, in which the pilgrim will reap the rewards of their struggle with body and soul. So this section comes from Act 2, which was the mind, and on this road for me. And it divided into 3 acts. The first act, the act of the body, I was actually walking with a theologian. He had been trained by Cardinal Ratzinger. I couldn't believe it. I met him on day 1 of the Camino, the only person I walked with for 400 kilometres on this road, the only other walker I met, was a theologian, German, trained by Cardinal Ratzinger. I mean, you can imagine, day 1, I thought, yes, I am home with my sins. I'm going to tick the boxes and be out of here. Not so. Anyway, so her theology was Act 1. Act 2 was when I thought, great, I'm on my own again. I've dealt with quite a struggle with my theologian. And I thought, yes, you beauty, I'm alone. And on day 1 of Act 2, I met the Amigo, who was a divinely handsome Spaniard who clearly decided that the one lone woman on the trail was his for company. Beautiful man. I mean, I don't wish to make light of him. He was a really lovely man who was walking the Camino, I discovered, in memory of his brother. And he told me before this that his brother had committed suicide. He was an incredibly smiling, always happy person. He still is, actually. But this particular day, I had wrestled the night before long with desire, so the sin of lust had come up and bit me on the bottom, and I'd kind of gone through all that in my head because I'm a very happily married person. But we got up the next morning and we went into the day, and this was the day. We talked all the livelong day, different rhythms and a few rhymes, out past the centuries-old arch into the 21st century, onto a long stretch of treed Camino, stopping at a bridge for snacks and silence, on down the lavender-lined road, under tutting stalks and past 2 orange-shirted diggers constructing a dry stone wall. Roman techniques lived on. We spoke of devotion, of faith in a God, and of faith in others, of fidelity and marriage, about our most precious memories. For him, the birth of a son, when he said he had matured into manhood, For me, the death of my mother when I vowed to live, not exist. I was reminded of that vow with every death. About regrets. In his case, an affair with his wife's closest friend. But that stopped me in my tracks. He had spoken of fidelity with such urgency, and yet when he'd lapsed, it was a double betrayal. I could scarcely believe I was walking with someone whose situation exactly mirrored that of my sinners. I asked my amigo how he could have been so careless of his wife, this woman he loved. He said he was a different man then. Well, why not? We can change. But we do live with the regrets. He asked me to tell him the sins I carried, and I said I couldn't. But I don't know these people, he said. I made a promise, I said. Una promesa. So we walked on, picking fennel tops to chew and wild rosemary to sniff. He said there was something he had never told anyone, and proceeded to describe events from decades earlier. I listened, but I could make no sense. His casual tone didn't fit the words I was translating. I asked him to repeat, questioned him. 8? Yes, 8. Every night? Yes, every night. I had to ask him to show me what he meant. My brain was so unwilling to process the story. Finally, watching the mime I'd requested, I could no longer deny what I was hearing. Under an electricity pylon, I sank to the ground. A man of the cloth had forced himself on my amigo's then 8-year-old brother, night after night. His brother told my amigo one evening after they'd been watching their sons play football. Then he swore my amigo to secrecy in order to protect their parents. Una promesa. It was never spoken of again. My amigo sat beside me, his citrus scent mixed with the aniseed of fennel. After a long time, he apologised for speaking of his sin, as he referred to it. No es tu pecado, I said. It's not your sin. Es mi secreto, he said. It's my secret. I pictured that little brother, grown to manhood, and his fears for his sons. I tried to imagine the story my amigo had invented for their parents and for his brother's wife and children. I wondered about the weight of all those lies. Lies told to honour his brother's wishes and to protect those left behind. How could they be a sin? What I remember most is the anger, like a tsunami. And I absolutely do not believe that anger was a sin. How could I not feel angry with the Pope, the bishops, the cover-up, the refusal to take responsibility for those little people grown large, blaming themselves in stifling silence, and for those who loved them and were helpless to ease the pain? Anger seems a fitting response when hope is killed. Surely the theft of innocence warrants rage. I thought of my theologian's God who could foresee everything, and I boiled. Tranquilo, my amigo said. No te preocupes. Be calm, don't fret. It was hard to hold on to calm or rationality, hard to find compassion or to remember that the perpetrator might have been a victim himself, hard to have any of those thoughts in the face of my amigo's loss, his confusion about his own culpability and the church's intransigence. It was hard not to wish for vengeance. Distant thunder broke the silence. My amigo held out a hand to help me up with my pack. Vámonos, he said. Let's go. I suppose the thing I'd like to say about the amigo's story, not more generally, is that he walked the Camino for his brother. And you meet a lot of people, as Tony said, who are walking for many, many reasons. But when we split, he walked the Camino in a couple of stages, but when he actually got to Santiago a long time after me, but he wrote me when he got there. And you know, angels didn't come from the sky and things weren't miraculously better. But he changed his life. He'd been working in a bank and, quite high up. And part of the whole global crisis thing was kicking in. And he really was forced to think about it. And he's now working in an aid organisation. And I don't know if that's for his brother. I don't know what it is. But I think it's because of the fact that he took that time to stare it down and the fact that he told me. I'm still actually the only person he's ever told. I don't know if he'll ever tell his parents. I don't know if he needs to now. I don't have a judgment about that. But what I do know is that he healed something by walking, by engaging with it, by confronting it. And, as part of that healing for him was within his faith. I mean, we talked later about what he believed. And we had an interesting conversation in which we asked each other what we both most wanted in the world, and he said, just peace for myself. And I think in a strange way he's found it, and I think the Camino had a lot to do with that. I wouldn't like to speculate too much more about his reasons, but I do know he's, something lodged for him in that journey to Santiago. So I suppose I just want to say I believe in hope. I believe that restoration is possible, and I believe very deeply that it comes from kindness to each other and openness to each other.
Extraordinary story. And I must say, what I take out of it is a firm belief that reconciliation is possible, contrary to all the other evidence. We're running out of time. Could we have 1 minute, because Ailsa has a... thank you for that story. Wonderful, wonderful. And the power of the storyteller.
Can I say, actually, thank you for, the weird events of this last period of time. I've never actually read that story at any of the book readings before, and when people talk to me about the Amigo, they only talk about the fact that I stared down desire. They're fascinated by the conversation about me wanting him. Can I just say, actually, it's a great... Because for me, that's his story. His story is not about me thinking he was gorgeous. It's so peripheral. Sure. So I'm grateful that somehow it conspired that we actually talked about the real story of him tonight and honoured him. So thank you.
Thank you. At the end of could we take just 2 minutes? Because Ailsa has a statement at the end, which is her credo, and you were moving into that. But would you do me a favour in reading it? Read that. This seems to me, and you'll make your own explanation, of course, but it seems to me that there's a distillation of what walking, this insight of carrying sins, what you have learnt about yourself, what you've learnt about the world, you've put into very powerful language there. So.
Big fear was always that, I wouldn't bring home anything for people. It was the most profound fear. So this is literally my last night on the road. What have I learned in 1,200 kilometres? I didn't know at this point that I had another 100 to go, actually. I didn't know I'd decide to go on to Finisterre. What have I learned in 1,200 kilometres? Well, I do have faith in the simplicity of walking, the power of forgiveness, the kindness of Spaniards, the goodness that wants to prevail, the ache to be better, and the impulse to serve. I believe in confession with all my heart, telling the true story of ourselves, eye to eye with another human being, owning up to all that we are. I believe that stories shape our lives, and that the more honest we are in our stories, the more freedom we will gain. I know there's nothing more sacred to me than the act of putting one foot down on a dusty road and then putting down the other, again and again, for as long as it takes, turning up and doing the work. And I know that the work never ends. I know there is beauty in effort. I know slow is sublime. Slow food, slow dance, slow talk. I know snails are gurus. I know we are all connected, whether we like it or not, and we owe it to this astonishing planet and those we hope might come after to acknowledge that fact in our actions as well as our words. I don't know any more than I ever did about what comes after, or if there even is an after. But one thing I do know, I absolutely know, I will die. And I'm perfectly happy to die wondering. There are so many wonders.
Extraordinary stuff. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Well, we're very lucky with what we've just heard. But here's your opportunity to ask a question or to share an experience. We've got about 10 minutes, so. Yes, at the back.
Just stand and speak well.
Yes. Could you stand up and just speak well?
Yeah. The movie The Way, obviously a lot of people have seen. It's actually inspired me to go next year. So I think it's really. So have you seen the movie and what did you think?
Do you want to go first or shall I?
Okay.
You go first.
Yes, I've seen the movie. I loved it. In fact, I've found a wonderful parallel between Martin Sheen carrying the ashes of his dead son and Ailsa carrying the ashes of people's delinquencies. And there were lots of connections in that. And if I could, there was something we haven't mentioned, and I think it's important for me anyway. There's a point in the Camino which is called the Crux Ferro, the Iron Cross. And there's a tradition, it's the highest point of the Camino Frances. And you climb up this hill, and there's an ancient tradition that you carry a brick. And the brick symbolises something that you want to leave there. A hatred, an envy, a grief, something of... And then people carry other people's bricks. In my experience, the pilgrims I was with, they had a whole pocket full of stones that they came for all sorts of people at home. Then I thought, that's exactly what I was just talking about, carrying other people's brokenness in their life. So that was in the film, wasn't it? Anyway, that seemed to be the wisdom of the medieval practice that this friend of mine has picked up and illustrated just how deep that can be in carrying one another's sins. But anyway, the film. What did you like the film?
Well, it's really hard for me to speak about it. I mean, I just sat there and sobbed the whole way.
Yeah, that's right.
It was actually being shot when I walked the Frances, in fact, and so there was all this, because the Camino is like any village, there's gossip, gossip, and somehow it goes up and down, it goes backwards and forwards on the Frances, not this one so much, because it's much more solitary. But I kept hearing, Martin Sheen's on the road, and so you kind of have this consciousness that every time you'd be thinking, oh, the camera's up there. All these stinky beasts hoping to be extras. So literally the landscape was actually the landscape I saw when I walked in the condition it was in, so it was very strange to watch it, and I loved it. I think I was frightened they were going to kind of do a number on the Camino and claim it for themselves somehow. And I thought they actually had a very light touch, and particularly, the woman's character in it. I thought, don't make this too much about, her choice or anything. And it just felt to me like they handled it with grace, actually.
So
yeah.
The only regret is that the numbers on the Camino are going to multiply, which I want to keep it quiet.
Do the Mozarabe.
Ailsa, could you explain what you're like prior to going on the Camino and what you're like coming home? What happened to you in that period? What are you like today? And you too, Tony. What were you like leaving Australia and coming home? What did it do to you?
Sure. Did everybody get the question at the back?
When I walked the Frances, it was for myself. That was my Camino. And I do think I was changed by that in certain ways. But this one, I never intended to walk another Camino 6 months later either, I might add. That even for someone who likes to walk, that's stupid. And also I didn't financially, it wasn't sort of something that made sense either. But the second one was, I suppose, is the one that I would say in some ways I couldn't have done this, I don't think, if I hadn't done that first one. But there are certain things now that I carried, gossip for me, having grown up in the world of showbiz, marvellous, love gossip. I have a really thin skin about certain things like that now because I see that as trading in the lives and the souls of others, and I really have a very thin skin now for the way in which we share information about people. I hope it made me more tolerant. I mean, I'd like to think it did, but I still lose my temper. I still have those tsunamis of rage about so many things, but I think the one thing that it absolutely did convince me of, and I haven't talked about the Spaniards, the people I met for 1 hour who literally called me, these 2 gay men, married men in Spain, who met me for 1 hour in Barcelona before I'd started walking, and then called me every day for 6 weeks to say, are you all right? Do you need anything? Is there anything I can do? We'll come, we'll bring money, we'll do it. The kindness. And so that, I think once you've experienced that kind of kindness thrust at you for no reason, you feel a deep responsibility to pay it forward in some way. I think I did board work and all that sort of, I was sat on boards and did kind of smart things, that looked like you was offering something of yourself before I went. But I feel now that I actually owe it to the people who were kind to me on the Camino to take that into my life wherever I can. I fail all the time, I'm horrible most of the time, but I try harder. Yeah, I really try, because to receive that level of grace just pumping at you, you have no choice but to try to meet it.
Very briefly, I have a sense of continuity, not discontinuity. I mean, the Camino wasn't a big conversion for me, and I don't think my life there have been big conversions. You asked me why I'm a priest. I just see there's continuity, unfoldingness. And the Camino just happened to come along at a very nice time for that to continue. I don't think I'm better or worse. I met Ailsa. That was an absolute plus. I mean, the thinking about and the reflecting upon it and the reflecting upon these issues is almost as significant to me as walking the Camino. I don't know. But it adds to it, doesn't it?
But they say this thing that you don't walk the Camino walks you.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly once you've walked it, no matter how long and in what way and whether you stay at refuges or not, I just think then you're on the Camino forever. You kind of can't get off it, It's.
I'll do it again.
Yeah.
What a boast. Promessa.
You heard it here.
Do you have the sense as a pilgrim, I did a mock thing last year, and that there is something about being a pilgrim that the locals reverence more than they do to a tourist or somebody else?
Completely.
Paul's question was, for the people at the back, is there something about being a pilgrim that the local people reverence?
Do you know, the number of people who say to you, which you would have had, say a prayer for me in Santiago, the way in which they bring you into their houses. I mean, there's the credential, which, you have to carry to get it stamped. But I would, on the Mozarabe, where there were not refuges and there wasn't a pilgrim culture, they would often say to me, what are you doing? Why are you walking? And I'd say, I'm a pilgrim. And they'd say, oh, no, the Camino's up there in the north. And I'd say, no, this is an old Camino road. And even though they didn't have pilgrims all the time, they opened their houses, they opened their sports centres, because it's the act. They do have a deep thing about what it is to undertake that journey consciously, and they would give me holy pictures that I hadn't been given since I was 6. I mean, the kind of beautiful saints I'd never heard of course, because the Spanish have all those extra saints. But they would give you anything. I always remember there was a woman who stopped me, and this is not in the book. This is from the Portuguese Camino. She stopped me one day and rushed towards me, left her car idling and said, will you make a prayer for me in Santiago? And I said yes, and because I have enough Spanish to have a simple conversation, I said, what's the prayer? And she said her mother was dying and she wanted someone to, and she started to offer me money, and I said, no, I don't need money. She said, but you must light candles. And I said, I'll light candles. And I said, but why did you stop? You didn't. And she said, no, I pick you. You're the pilgrim. And I said, why? She said, I don't know, but I've been waiting. So you have these things and you don't know why, but you feel that and I don't know, I did, there's no sort of end to that story, but there's that thing of I'm waiting for a pilgrim, the right pilgrim. There'll be a pilgrim that I feel can do something. They have this sense of what it is to make that journey that's very beautiful. It affects you, yeah.
Take one more question. Yes.
It's actually more of a comment. My name's Francis, and I hope to do the Camino next year. But I was really touched when you talked about the vulnerability and about the mirror reflection and the sense of community. Do we carry other people's sins? And I think, yes, we do, and we do that daily, because as we carry another's sins, we carry our own. And the vulnerability of hearing some of those stories was really touching you, touching your own sense of our own vulnerability. So it's about that real honesty. So when another person comes to you totally vulnerable, touches your vulnerability that you're trying to touch, it's that honesty. Mm-hmm. So we all help each other in that communal sense, or that forgiving of self. So thanks for sharing that.
No, thank you. Thanks.
We come across it every single day, which is absolutely beautiful.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, we're going to stop there just for a few moments and give you a chance to stand up and stretch. And then we have a short presentation from Trevor Green from Olive Tree Travel. From Stephen Green. Stephen has been organising a number of pilgrimages for various parishes, and in fact Tony is about to head off one next year to the Holy Land with Martin Dixon. So just give us 5 minutes as we turn things around. But can I just say initially, the Camino de Santiago is a miracle, and part of the miracle is that it brings people like Tony and Ailsa to us tonight. So it's been really great. Yeah. Could you take a seat, please? And we're ready to go again. Yeah. Could you take a seat, please? Thank you. Could you take a seat, please? Sandy?
Do you want to sit?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those of you who would like to purchase the book and who would like Ailsa to sign it, immediately afterwards, in about 10 minutes' time, Ailsa will be in the meeting room there, and you can meet her and get her to sign your copies of the book. Also, on your seats, you would have seen a brochure for a book by Lynn Muir, which is the Celtic Address book. We hope to have copies tonight, but they haven't arrived from overseas. But we have got one copy if you want to have a look at that. And Lynn is here at the back, and she'll be around the back afterwards as well if you want to talk with her. Can I now... Oh, of course, our best-selling author. We must have that available. It's my pleasure to introduce Stephen Green from Olive Tree Travel. Stephen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me this evening, and I'm sure you'll all agree that that was a very powerful and refreshing conversation. So thank you, Ailsa and Tony. I've been in the business of arranging faith-based journeys, pilgrimages, spiritual travel, theological study tours, and the like since the late 90s, and recently set up and started doing it through my own company called Olive Tree Travel, which has been a great way for me to get to places like the Camino and Jerusalem, Rome, and other pilgrimage sites and historical places around the world. I have noticed in the years that I've been doing it that what I term meaningful travel, worthwhile travel, has actually been steadily increasing over the years, to the extent that more and more people are hearing about and yearning to do things like the Camino. And many of you may have heard of the large European-based coach tour company called Globus Travel, Globus Tours. They historically did big coach tours to, 21 countries in 19 days throughout Europe. And recently, they've actually come out with a brochure titled Religious Travel. And when this hit my agency, it just made me stop for a second and realise that, hey, there is a significant portion of the travelling population that are interested in doing these meaningful tours and journeys. So there you go. Many of my groups are now doing things like volunteering, fundraising as part of their travels and giving back to the community, which is a really refreshing aspect of travelling. I guess the Camino, in my experiences with it, and what I found out is that it's is actually the most covered and celebrated of all the pilgrimage routes, rivaling Jerusalem and Rome that I mentioned. Historically, it's been to pay homage to St. James, the Apostle, one of Jesus' disciples. But nowadays, people have so many varied and valid reasons for doing the Camino. what's interesting is, as we've discovered from the conversation, there are the various different routes, whether it's the Francaise or the Northern or the Portuguese route, and I just think that that's a very good, marketing ploy that the Spanish tourism guys have thought of, because wherever you are, all roads lead to Santiago, but it shows you can do it from virtually anywhere. By visiting the Camino, you become part of its ongoing history. You'll be following the footsteps of millions of pilgrims before you, including St. Francis of Assisi and the first ever recorded pilgrim, a guy called Bishop Lepew, in 951. You partake in traditions that date back centuries, and we spoke about and heard about the tradition of putting the stone or the brick in the pile of the high iron cross, representing the promise or intention to shed what you no longer wish to carry. We've heard about the certificate that you get at the end through the credential. Doing the Camino can be one of the hardest and yet most rewarding experiences of your life. This is experiential travel. It is easy to choose a lie-on-the-beach holiday, but walking the pilgrimage is a trip that can be profound and life-changing, as we've heard. Let me show you a 5-minute DVD that's going to paint some pictures and let the pictures tell the story. Those that have been will reminisce, and those that haven't will hopefully want to go. Enjoy.
For over 1,000 years, pilgrims from all over the world have followed the road that leads to Santiago de Compostela, the city that grew up around the tomb of the Apostle St. James. Cities, sanctuaries, hermitages and cathedrals line the route that even today continues to enjoy extraordinary cultural and social life. Since its beginnings, the Camino de Santiago was not just a road for religious pilgrimage. As a meeting place for people from different backgrounds, it gave rise to a culture based on the exchange of ideas and artistic and social currents, and to a political and economic activity that helped to forge modern-day Europe, acting as its first unifying channel. On foot or on horseback, by bicycle or by car, today in the 21st century, Santiago continues to be visited via a variety of routes by pilgrims from every continent and every social background. The French way, traditionally the best known, reaches Spain across the Pyrenees. Although the Portuguese or the Northern way, skirting the Bay of Biscay coastline, also lead to Compostela. One of the Camino's permanent features is its hospitality. Since the very beginning, monasteries, hospitals and refuges appeared to take care of travellers. Nowadays, there exists a large network of hostels scattered all along St. James' route, opening their doors for pilgrims. And in turn, there has also appeared a modern range of hotels and rural tourism houses, diversifying the Camino's services and attractions. In modern times, the reasons that take travellers to Santiago vary greatly. For some, these reasons are religious and a way of understanding life, while for others the reasons are cultural, or for tourism. All are equally valid, and all help to come into contact with people, cultures, and customs all along a route that has been appointed First European Cultural Itinerary and World Heritage, and which recently won the Prince of Asturias Award for Concord. Compostela is the goal for walkers and travellers, and at the same time is the starting point for a new journey when you reach the Plaza de Obradoiro. The cathedral, with its baroque towers, accompanied by the palaces of Rajoy and Gelmírez, the Collegiate of San Jerónimo, and the Hostal de los Reyes Católicos, concentrates 1,000 years of art and history for visitors. After fulfilling the ritual at the Pórtico de la Gloria and embracing the Apostle, pilgrims can watch the spectacular flight of the largest incensary in the world, the Botafumeiro, skillfully handled by the tiraboleiros. Proudly seal their Compostela, which demonstrates that they have completed the Camino, and later explore the forest of stone that is the city of Santiago, offering an unbeatable collection of sights with its monasteries, churches, palaces, squares, and popular streets that have consolidated its international fame as a historical and cultural centre, confirmed every day by the thousands of pilgrims and tourists who visit.
So there are various ways Australians or any tourists, pilgrims can do the Camino. The first is the hardcore pilgrimage. Either do it all, do it multiple times, do the various different routes, or do partial walking. Or what we could do is the soft pilgrimage, which is to walk a bit, drive a bit, by coach. Not everyone can walk the entire Camino. Not everyone wants to or is able to carry a 15-kilogram backpack. Sleep in dorms with 20 other pilgrims, share bathrooms, or with German cyclists, by the way. There are many Australians that are looking to or wanting to join or form a group to do it together with a like-minded bunch of people. It's my hope and wish that Ailsa or Tony or John Garratt would put up their hands after the amazing expressions of interest or response to the launch tonight and say, you know what, we're going to take a group over and see where we go with it. I do have other parish priests and religious leaders at various stages throughout the next couple of years that are at various stages of forming groups to take over and do the an itinerary of Spain, often incorporating Portugal or incorporating France, where the groups would go in the luxury of a coach that would take care of all the porterage and taking care of the transporting of luggage. And on various days there'd be parts to walk, but other parts to drive. And so that's on the cards. Individuals, independent travellers who want to go on their own, there are that many ways of getting there and doing the Camino. There are now cycling tours available for couples, for individuals, for groups. I've even seen you can do horseback, and some companies advertise that a mule walks with you and takes your luggage, so you don't have to worry about it. Some of the other tour companies also have regular coach and tour departures. In terms of airfares, I guess with the emergence of some of the airlines like Emirates and Etihad, and that competition has been great, and Thai Airways have got a very good fare into Madrid, Emirates particularly also to Barcelona. I got an email today from Emirates that was advertising fares, or is advertising fares into Barcelona for 1847 return, including all the tax. So, it's not as prohibitive as it once was to get to Europe. Accommodation ranges from simple family-run rural inns to elegantly restored manor houses, rectories and watermills. There are also some paradors on the road and in Santiago themselves. Paradors are often former castles, hospitals, monasteries, and are part of the National Trust and heritage listed. Regardless of whether you will be part of a group or going solo, through the local Spanish ground operator and agent that I work with and have worked with for many years, we can tailor-make an experience for you depending on the time you have available, your level of fitness, preferred daily mileage, and preferred accommodation category. We take care of all the logistics. All you need to do is put your day pack on and focus on the walk. For individuals, we arrange self-guided walking tours whereby accommodation, meals, and luggage transfers are taken care of and organised for you. You get a set of instructions, maps, and you walk from inn to inn. My recommendation would be to avoid midsummer, July and August, and book in advance, book well in advance with the increase in popularity. I had a fantastic first-hand experience a number of years ago when my wife and I visited Santiago on a self-made fact-finding mission. We spent a few days in the most beautiful town, engaged with local guides, saw their passion and pride in the city and the country they live in. We got to experience the food, which became a highlight. The tapas are unbelievable. The first two words I had to learn, though, were sin jamón, because if you don't eat ham or pork, which most of the tapas seem to, you'll soon have to pick up sin jamón. Stayed at lovely hotels. We then actually picked up a car from Santiago and drove along northern Spain through Burgos, Santander, and to one of my favourite cities in the world, San Sebastian, which was great. It's I describe it as a Bondi Beach with class. So it was fantastic. We then drove through Bilbao, and as ashamed as I am of this, rushed through the Guggenheim in about 20 minutes to make it in time to see a Spanish football game. It was Bilbao playing Deportivo La Coruña. Or is it La Coruña Deportivo? But that was a cultural highlight, never to be forgotten. And then flew to Barcelona. So itineraries are varied with anyone's interest. Just to conclude and to reflect, I feel privileged to have been a part of the Camino in my small way and my small moment in history, but nonetheless making up part of the Camino's ongoing history, where I believe that those that have done it have all formed part of the chain that links the past with the future. The memories I have of my trip and the meals I ate, the laughs I shared, the people we met have made the experience of the Camino all the more meaningful and in some sort of way help shape who I am today. As Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbour, and catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, discover. Thank you very much for your time tonight. If I could just ask, on your way out, I've prepared a take-home present. You can see I've been going to way too many children's birthday parties, but your take-home gift is a beautifully designed Camino map of Spain with the various routes and some handy hints. I've left some business cards around, and there is also a couple of expressions of interest forms if you'd like to be kept abreast of any developments, be it a John Garratt tour or any other opportunities in the future. So feel free to fill that out and I can keep you up to date. Thank you.
Paul, before you duck off, I was just going to draw attention to you. This is a man who, for his 50th anniversary as a priest, walked from Canterbury to Rome, 1,900 kilometres from it. Yeah. We've got some remarkable priests around who, in terms of, like Noel Brady, for example, who spoke here at the last time that we had a Camino thing, who's away for walking 3 months or something. You telling me, Paul? Yeah. To close thank you for coming, but to close the night, could I ask Tony Viviano to say a few words? Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Ailsa. It was a wonderful evening. Thank you to you all for being part of our experiment and streaming live to the world, really. I have no idea how many people are watching. I hope there are some. And to you that may be watching away from us, please do send us an email, sales@garrattpublishing.com.au, and let us know how it went, how we can improve it. Again, thank you for coming. Now, of course, we do this with our pleasure, and we're happy to have you here, but we do hope that you do buy some books as well when you come. And Ailsa and Tony will be very happy to sign copies of books for you. So again, thank you to Matt, to Sandy, to Jolene and Steve. Thank you also for putting the night together. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.